Good afternoon, distinguished colleagues, esteemed guests, and dear participants. It's a great honor and sincere pleasure to welcome you all to this important webinar titled Disrupting Cyberscam Syndicates, a Frontline Perspective. As cybercrime continues to evolve at an exceptional pace, we are no longer dealing with isolated incidents or traditional offenders. What we are witnessing today is the emergence of highly structured transnational cyber scam syndicates operating with levels of sophistication, coordination, and technological capability that compete legitimate multinational organizations. These groups, in fact, are no longer limited to simple phishing emails or basic fraud schemes. They are now deploying advanced tools, including artificial intelligence, social engineering at scale, and cryptocurrency-based laundering mechanisms to target individuals and governments across jurisdictions. From extortion networks and investment scams to business email compromise and romance fraud. What makes the challenge even more complex is that cyber scam syndicates exploit the very foundations of the digital world. First of all, the borderless nature of the internet. Secondly, jurisdictional fragmentation in legal systems and gaps in international cooperation. As a result, traditional law enforcement approaches designed for territorial crimes often struggle to effectively respond to these decentralized and rapidly adaptive criminal networks. This is indeed why discussions such as of today's are critically important. We are here not only to understand the threat, but to discuss frontline perspectives, practical insights from those who are directly engaged in combating these networks. Because disruption is no longer optional, it's an urgent necessity. From a legal standpoint, we must rethink how we attribute responsibility to complex digital ecosystems, how we enhance cross-border cooperation, and how do we ensure that emerging technologies are not weaponized faster than they are regulated. From a technical and operational standpoint, we must reinforce intelligence sharing, public-private partnerships, and advice detection mechanisms. And from a policy perspective, we must move toward greater harmonization of legal frameworks, ensuring that cyber criminals can't exploit soft places created by regularity conflicts. In fact, the fight against cyber scam syndicates is not merely a technical challenge, it's a governance challenge, a legal challenge, and a collective responsibility. No single institution or country can address this issue alone. It requires a coordinated interdisciplinary and international response. Today's webinar is a part of this effort. Allow me to briefly introduce the organizations behind this initiative. This webinar is jointly organized by the International Association of Cybercrime Prevention and Internet Fraud Watchdog Australia, and I will let Ken Gamble introduce Internet Fraud Watchdog in his speech. Our association is an international organization that brings together academics, legal practitioners, law enforcement professionals, and cybersecurity experts with a shared objective to prevent and combat cybercrime through knowledge, cooperation, and capacity building. The headquarters is based in Paris, and we have regional branches in Australia, Morocco, Lebanon, and Brazil. Our work, in fact, focuses on three main axes. First, research and knowledge production, where we contribute to advancing legal and technical understanding of emerging cyber threats. Second, training and capacity building through workshops, seminars, and specialized programs designed for judges, prosecutors, law enforcement officers, and policymakers. And finally, international cooperation, where we actively work to bridge gaps between jurisdictions and promote dialogue between stakeholders at a global level. Since the establishment of the association in 2006, we have organized almost 45 conferences and webinars in many countries, including Egypt, USA, Brazil, Lebanon, Morocco, Australia, Malaysia, France, South Africa, India, United Arab Emirates, and Qatar. We have a group of volunteers. Most of them are French lawyers, computer engineers, and students who help victims of cybercrime for free and provide them with assistance and advice. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our distinguished speaker today, Ken Gamble. In fact, Ken is my friend and colleague, and I have known him for 20 years. He is a board member of our association in Paris and the head of our branch in Australia. He serves as a chairman of Internet Fraud Watchdog Global, and we have organized very successful conferences together on cybercrime worldwide. Ken is an international investigator with over 38 years experience specializing in cyber-enabled fraud, organized crime, and asset recovery. As a chairman of Internet Fraud Watchdog, he has conducted and led complex investigations and tackled cyber scams across multiple jurisdictions, including Southeast Asia and Africa, often in collaboration with law enforcement and regulatory bodies. Today, he will share with us a frontline perspective on how cybercrime networks operate and, most importantly, how they can be effectively challenged and take part. Ken, thank you so much for accepting our invitation, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. My pleasure. And you can hear me very well. Is my sound all good?
Everything's okay.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much and welcome everybody. And it's my great pleasure to be joined tonight on this webinar and to give you a little bit of context and history about what I've been seeing in my career as an investigator and as the chairman of IFW. And I've been in this industry now for 38 years, as Mohammed said, and I'm going to show a presentation tonight which goes into a little bit about the background of how I got involved in investigating scams back in 2007 when I started, and what I witnessed back in the very early days, and what I recognise as being a major international problem back then, what has now morphed into a $450 billion criminal industry, 450 billion last year, 400 to $400 billion a year in criminal profits around the world, $16.6 billion lost in America last year in 2025. We are facing one of the most unprecedented levels of crime across the world that the world has ever seen. And so I'm going to take you into a little bit into my world and show a presentation, give you a little bit of history, and give you my perspective of what I think has gone wrong, what we're doing right, and show you some of the successful operations that we've done with law enforcement all over the world, arresting and prosecuting and dismantling and disrupting major criminal syndicates that have chosen to use the internet as a major tool for scamming. So I'll just open up my presentation here, and hopefully that will all work.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, so today's title of my talk is Disrupting Cyber Scam Syndicates. I'm going to talk about the legal innovation, the cross-border strategies that have been put in place over recent years, and the operational reality of what we're facing out there. This is, as I said, an unprecedented catastrophic crime problem that has caught a lot of the world by surprise. And the sad thing is we knew about this since 2007, that this was coming, this crime wave. So just to tell you a little bit about who we are, IFW Global, we're a private company, privately funded by our clients. A lot of those clients are people who have lost money in internet fraud and investment fraud cases. We're a global company. We were founded in 2007, originally in Europe. We then relocated our operations to Australia and opened up a US office. So we're licensed by the police force in New South Wales, where we're based. And we have a lot of strategic alliances around the world that we tap into on a regular basis. And that includes law enforcement and, of course, security agencies, and a big network of people and friends in very different industries, which are all very helpful for fighting crime. I've been in the business for 38 years, so I have developed extensive global networks in this area, and we have to liaise with many different governments, law enforcement. As Mohammed said, we do presentations in all different countries around the world in order to educate and to help governments understand what they need to do to put things in place. So IFW essentially started off as Internet Fraud Watchdog. That's where the IFW comes from. And we did rebrand around 2013 into IFW Global to be a truly global investigative agency. My background is in investigation. I started in 1988 as a private investigator. I worked on a government contract in my early years doing covert surveillance operations for the Australian government and also privately for insurance companies. And I worked in covert surveillance and intelligence gathering for probably about 15 years before I started in actual internet and cybercrime related fraud, which started in around 2007. Over the years, I've been very fortunate to be awarded with 4 law enforcement awards due to my work working in foreign countries with law enforcement. And I have built a number of strategic alliances and memorandum of understandings, MOUs, with various different governments and law enforcement agencies. And of course, being on the board of directors with Mohammed in the association, we've also been heavily involved in training and education over the years. And while I'm not training and educating, I'm out arresting criminals, and we have arrested literally hundreds of success. We've conducted hundreds of cases arresting different criminal groups around the world that are involved in fraudulent operations. Now, I want to start with 2007. This case went to air in 2008, but in 2007, when IFW was founded, when we started, we uncovered what was the biggest global ticket scam in history, which started happening in 2007, and it was launched months and months before the Beijing Olympics. This guy in the photo was subsequently arrested and prosecuted after the crime was committed. But before the crime was committed, we knew 6 months before that he was going to conduct this fraud, and we reached out tirelessly to law enforcement agencies in the United Kingdom, including the Serious Fraud Office, and we couldn't get any police officer in the United Kingdom to look into this case. No police would look at it. They told me I had to fill out a form. No police officer would talk to me. They wouldn't accept our intelligence. They would accept it. They said to put it in an online form. I had a 40-page dossier, which I couldn't put in a form. But I realised back then that there was a fundamental flaw and a major problem within law enforcement, particularly in the UK at this time. We were about to witness one of the greatest scams in history unfolding 6 months down the track from when I tried to warn the authorities, and no one would listen. So when the Beijing ticket scam happened in August of 2008, 5,000 tickets were sold around the world. Something like 50 million pounds, British pounds, was scammed from victims all over the world that bought front row tickets to see people to sit in the Olympics in Beijing and to have front row seats. Some people even went to see their families competing in the Olympics, and they bought what they thought were very high-end seating in the Olympics. But as it turned out, it was nothing but a major scam. Now, this case made history, certainly out here in Australia. It was the front page of our Sydney Morning Herald newspaper. And this was 12 months after we launched Internet Fraud Watchdog, because we realised there was a fundamental problem. Now, after this went to air, once this story reached the front page of every newspaper in the world, IFW was up and running, and we were now real serious players in the internet fraud space within just 12 months of launching. So from here, we actually started to build quite an incredible array of contacts and respect around the world, and I'll take you a little bit on that journey. One of the things I realised back then, and it hasn't changed all that much, is that law enforcement were facing one of the greatest dilemmas in the history of law enforcement. The internet has facilitated a way for criminals to make $400+ billion a year in criminal activity. Now, none of the law enforcement agencies in the world, even the most powerful, were not set up for this type of crime. So the common response that we would get when we would talk to law enforcement was that it was out of our jurisdiction. That was a very common one. These are unregulated platforms. Victims shouldn't have engaged with them. We don't have resources to pursue these types of cases. We have no budget for overseas operations. The victim's money has gone overseas. We have no jurisdiction to investigate these cases. The offenders are overseas. Our hands are tied. Now, this went on for more than a decade in Australia for victims reporting serious and organised criminal fraud, taking hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars out of Australia alone, and our law enforcement agencies were powerless to do anything. The men and women on the front line of policing had no resources and no platform, no ability to capture the complaints. They just weren't set up for it. So nobody saw this coming except us, because by this time we realised that criminal activity around the world started to proliferate across a number of countries in the world. Now, we categorise the global scam industry into really only a handful of types of scams that involve these are the largest money-making schemes for criminals. Of course, we have ransomware, we have hacking, we have business email compromise, we have a lot of different types of other cyber crimes, but these scams, these ones right here on the screen, are the most profitable for criminals. These are the scams that make hundreds of millions of dollars a year per syndicate, $1 to $5 million per week in profits, because they're of the way in which these scams are coordinated. Now, the countries there that I've listed, and I'll talk about that a little bit more further in the talk, these are the main countries where these scams are. Now, these are not offending countries. I want to make a strong point about that. These are not the countries that are to blame. These are the countries where the criminals who are behind these syndicates have chosen to set up. And I'll go into detail more about that in a short while, because a lot of people look at the scams tracing to these countries and they start blaming the countries as being the main perpetrators. Certainly, some of the countries may have, turned a blind eye, or they may have had a lack of will, but many of these countries are really targeted as an environment, not necessarily the country themselves offending. So when we look at a scam can come in so many different shapes and sizes, but a scam is whenever a victim loses money, when a victim engages with a perpetrator and makes an investment of some sort into a trading platform, into stocks and shares, into a cryptocurrency trading scheme, into some sort of investment. They move their money, or they pay their money, or they're instructed to pay their money into either a crypto wallet or a bank account, most often located in an overseas jurisdiction. Now, the moment that money leaves our jurisdiction here in Australia or any other country, the money is moving across about 6 jurisdictions within hours across the world. And that's because the criminals know that when they cross borders, they hamper and they disrupt law enforcement's ability to pursue that money at any speed. So what we have developed, and what we had to develop, is a way in which the mechanisms of tracing money could prove successful. And we realised a very long time ago that the legal and law enforcement methods are not working, and they have not been able to work successfully at all because of the speed in which the scam syndicates operate. Still to this day, we're light years behind. And when you look at the amount of fraud that's been happening in recent years, it's something that would make you shudder when you think about the amount of money that has been put into the hands of criminals. So when victims pay money to a criminal syndicate, there is a very sophisticated level of laundering that money behind the syndicate. They don't just put it into the fraudster's bank account. Those days are long gone, many years ago. What we see in this day and age is a sophisticated laundering process, and that process involves many layers. It also involves another industry called the money laundering industry. The fraudsters that run the syndicates are not laundering the money. They contract that service out to money laundering syndicates who are a different industry. So when the money laundering syndicates get caught by law enforcement, that's where it stops. They get prosecuted, they get the money frozen, they get their bank accounts frozen, and some of the lower level money mules get prosecuted. But the people at the top of the money laundering syndicate never get prosecuted. They never get caught. And the people involved in the actual frauds don't get caught because they're one step removed from the money laundering process. So when victims are targeted at scale by a syndicate that may have 100 to 1,000 workers working in a call center, there is a specific process. Now, to simplify the process, we see the scammers engaging the fraudster. We see them extracting the money from the fraudster by gaining their confidence and signing them up to a platform or some sort of scheme that looks very sophisticated online. It may be a crypto trading platform, for example. And the customer believes that they're actually engaging in real trading. They believe that the perpetrator they're speaking to is a real broker from a real international firm, trading firm, that has real credentials and real qualifications. But what this network is doing is tricking the victim into believing that they're real. They even sometimes convince the victim that they're regulated by using cloned companies that are regulated. So there's a lot of tricks. And what they do is they layer the money, whether it's cryptocurrency or bank transfers. It used to be bank transfers. Even to this day, we still see bank transfers being made, but a large portion of the criminal industry has now gone to cryptocurrency as a means of laundering. So what they do is they layer upon layer upon layer of people in different jurisdictions across the world that layer and launder the cryptocurrency into different exchanges, into different countries. For example, money might leave Australia. It may get paid into a wallet of an exchange at HTX in Hong Kong. Then that money in Hong Kong will be sent through an exchange in Malta. The Maltese exchange will then send the funds up to another exchange that's based in Estonia. And then the Estonian exchange will then send that money across to Ukraine into an unregulated exchange, which then layers that money and offers the cash out facility to the criminals involved in cashing that money out. And they convert those funds, that cryptocurrency, to good hard US dollars or euros. And that money is then paid to the criminal syndicate. Now, the biggest flaw in the law enforcement system is the inability for law enforcement agencies to understand the entire ecosystem, because this is a criminal ecosystem that has been developed over many years. They are experts and extremely clever and very well funded. and they have incredible resources, these criminal syndicates, these scam syndicates. They have incredible resources to be able to set up this system, which is designed to circumvent law enforcement. They know that some of their people down the chain are going to get arrested. They know that some of them are going to be prosecuted. But these syndicates are setting those people up, and they don't care when some of them fall, because the lower level syndicates, the lower level money laundering people, the mules, often don't even realise the extent of what they're laundering. They are often people who are recruited to be money mules, and they don't know much information about the actual syndicate and who the syndicate really is. So money mules often get prosecuted, and they often tell law enforcement that they don't know who they're really working for. And that creates, obviously, a massive problem for the prosecution case. So in recent years, we've seen the industrialization of fraud syndicates, scam compounds that are obviously, most of you have probably heard of this in the news, because these syndicates have become so big that they were almost believed to be state-sponsored in some cases. A lot of these emerged in Cambodia, Myanmar first, and then across to Cambodia and Laos, even the Philippines. These Chinese syndicates have masses and masses of workers, often human trafficked in from China, to work in what they thought were legitimate jobs in IT security and customer service and other roles. And many of these Chinese people became victims themselves into human trafficking through a recruitment process, which Chinese mafia families, who recently had a number of their members sentenced to death in China. These were largest Chinese organised criminal syndicates in the world, known as the Chinese mafia, that were actually setting these operations up in Myanmar and these countries. Now, they've been operating for more than 20 years, so this is not new, but they were mostly involved in casinos and online gambling. They didn't transform their operations into scams until COVID hit in 2019. So these syndicates built a global laundering arm across the world. They have enormous reach. They have incredible high-speed movement of funds across the world. They have been able to circumvent traditional law enforcement by fragmenting and operating across multiple jurisdictions at once. They are very highly organised and powerful, and they're very dangerous. There's been a lot of victims, human trafficked victims, that have been murdered. These are well-documented cases. These are very powerful organised criminal syndicates that have so much money that they're able to bribe government officials. And there's been a lot of reports about people in these countries that, particularly high-level officials, that have been bribed and co-opted by the criminal syndicates that have allowed these scams to flourish. Now, you've got to remember that countries like Cambodia, who I have a very special relationship with, and I'm currently an advisor to the Cambodian government, they were, in a way, victims themselves, because the Cambodian people were not involved in these scams. These were Chinese syndicates bringing in tens of thousands of Chinese people from China into Cambodia to work in compounds that were set up originally as casinos. So the Cambodian people were powerless and were unable to really even comprehend the size of these syndicates and how big they were growing, because none of the frauds that were happening across the world were being reported back to Cambodia. So for several years, the Cambodian government were never receiving any reports from victims around the world, because the victims in Australia that were losing hundreds of millions were reporting their cases, but our law enforcement agency had no capacity to investigate the crimes. So none of the investigations would lead back to Cambodia. So you had the perfect crime being committed from 2019 up until recent years. Probably last year is when the most impact started. So you've got a 6-year period, a 5 to 6 year period, where these syndicates were untouchable. And that's pretty scary when you look at the amount of money that they have been taking in. The headlines around the world speak for themselves. Hundreds rescued from scam centres, victims lured and trapped in Myanmar, global crackdowns. This has been identified as being a global security threat because these compounds are so vast, and the amount of money that Chinese criminals have made has enriched some of the biggest organised criminal syndicates on the planet. This money's gone into the hands of criminals who are using this money for nefarious purposes. So when you think about that, one would wonder, where has all the money gone? Well, luckily, the US government has frozen $15 billion of it in Bitcoin, but there's many more billions of dollars that has gone into the hands of criminals. And we don't know, nobody knows really, how much damage that's going to do to our economy and to the people, to the mums and dads around the world that are trying to live a normal, peaceful life, but are affected by crime in some way or another. Not necessarily even online crime, because these syndicates often fund other types of organised crime, including drug trafficking, and in recent years, terrorism. We've got a number of cases where global fraud syndicates have been linked directly to terrorism. So the system itself, I guess the legal system is not necessarily broken. And I think we've got to make that clear, that this is not a system that's broken. It's just too slow. We have very good legal mechanisms in place across the world. Most countries are quite up to speed and able to enforce the law within their country in a very good way. But these 8 points here is the reason why we have a $450 billion a year crime problem. It's just because of these 8 points. And, you know, it's a borderless crime. Our mutual legal assistance treaty, I don't know, I can't speak for other countries, but I can tell you the Australian MLAT system is incompetent and broken because it takes too long for mutual legal assistance to happen when crime is rapidly developing in a matter of seconds sometimes, and we have MLAT that can sometimes take months and months and months and months to get approved. Meanwhile, the scams are already closed down and completely shut down and unable to be tracked. So you've got inconsistent standards across countries. That's normal because we're dealing with multiple jurisdictions across the world, different laws, different legal systems, and that makes things very difficult. We've got a lack of assistance from some law enforcement agencies, won't cooperate with other law enforcement agencies. I witnessed that when I was at the Interpol event in Marrakesh, Morocco in November. Surprisingly, some countries didn't even turn up. There's huge resource gaps and capability gaps for overseas operations. This is where we saw the opportunity for a private enforcement agency back in 2007 and delayed financial intervention. There's no real focus on asset recovery or asset freezing by our law enforcement agencies. They just do what they can when they can. But there is a fundamental flaw in a system which I believe has caused catastrophic damage to victims around the world. Now, the model that we introduced is a very interesting model, and that's privatising. In other words, going after the crime syndicates without the assistance of our local law enforcement agencies. Now, I live in Australia. We have the Australian Federal Police, who are a national federal law enforcement agency that deals with organised crime and international crime. But up until recent years, they had no capacity to go after these sort of crimes. What we did know early in the piece, when I started investigating a lot of scams against Australians, is that almost every scam was coming out of the Philippines. The Philippines, up until recent years, was the scam capital of the world. It had been infiltrated by foreign crime gangs, particularly British, and Chinese and Israeli crime groups. They were infiltrating the Philippines and setting up operations because there was no enforcement. So when I started looking into the problem in the Philippines, I found that the Philippines was inundated with this type of crime. So I started operating what I call a private business model. How could I go into these countries and arrest all these people, but not involve the Australian Federal Police? So I come up with what I term as operating inside the gap. This was a massive gap in law enforcement. So I originally went to the Philippines. I was the first one to ever go into the Philippines and use this process where our victim appoints us legally with a special power of attorney. I then go to the Philippines physically. I appoint a local attorney in the Philippines who then becomes also the victim's special power of attorney. So myself and the lawyer are now power of attorney for the victim. We get that power of attorney authenticated in the Philippine embassy here in Australia, which means that I can take that case that's filed, the affidavit, and the special power of attorney, and I now have jurisdiction in the Philippines. So I then act for the victim without the victim having to come to the Philippines, and I file that case directly with law enforcement as a private complainant. And law enforcement are happy to accept that complaint as long as it is authorised and authenticated by the embassy. I then go to the prosecutor with the police, and I then go to the court and for the search warrant application, and I am a witness in that application for the search warrant because I've gathered evidence against the syndicate and I've taken photos of the people responsible, and I've given that evidence to police, and police have verified that evidence and found out that that evidence was accurate and that I really have identified a syndicate that have dozens of people working in there scamming Australians or other nationalities. So we then look for a way to identify the assets, where the money is going. We give that information to the local police in the Philippines. We then raid them, and we raid their office and we kick their doors in with SWAT teams and we arrest them. We then prosecute them. When I say we, the police prosecute, but we are involved in that prosecution as key witnesses, and we testify. And then we follow up with civil actions. Once the police have them in custody and we've frozen all their assets, we then take those assets with freezing injunctions, freezing orders, Mareva injunctions, and we then take the money. Now, this business model, which started in around about 2010, 2011 in the Philippines, works wonders, and it's been very successful. And just the most recent use of this business model, it was in South Africa in January, of which we busted one of the biggest scam syndicates in South Africa, hand in hand with the South African police, just on January 27. So just only a couple of months ago, a few months ago now, we took down one of the biggest syndicates. Every year, we've taken down at least one major international syndicate, and we continue to do that on a regular basis. Now, the global scam hotspots, as I've mentioned earlier, in all my career, in the last, I guess, 20 years that I've been focusing on scams, these 14 countries are the countries which criminal organisations have set up their operations. Now, as I mentioned earlier, because Cambodia is a major place where scams are operated from, it's not Cambodians that are running the scams. South Africa is also set up as a scam haven, and they're not South Africans that are running the scams. In Bulgaria and Serbia and Ukraine, yes, there are Serbians and Ukrainians employed in the scam centres, but they're not the masterminds. In Cyprus and UAE, it's a haven for scam syndicates, but they're not the nationalities. They're not UAE nationals that are running the scams. They're not Cypriot nationals that are running the scams. So the problem here is not the countries, but it's the exploitation of these countries by criminal organisations who see that there is weak oversight in these countries, so they target overseas offenders from these countries, and they know that they're going to get away with it, or they have got away with it for many, many years. So if you look at the amount of money that's been earned in criminal scams over the past 12 months, a majority of that money is coming, is actually the criminal offenders are coming from these countries. But of course, the money doesn't find its way back to these countries. It goes to other countries in which the perpetrators may be based. And that could be in England, or in Israel, or in Russia, or other countries where some of these syndicates are being run from. So following the money trail is difficult. It's very difficult. But it's the fundamental problem that law enforcement has. And it's also the only real way of actually getting to the masterminds is tracking the money across the world. And if we can track the money across the world, we can often find out who the criminals are. And one of the things that I've been personally involved in for many years is overseas asset tracing, that is using foreign legal mechanisms to trace money. Some countries, particularly countries that don't practice common law, they won't allow Mariva injunctions or freezing orders. You have to file substantive proceedings in those countries, which takes time. And it's just too slow. The process takes way too long. It can take us 12 months to get to a frozen account, to be able to get that money back, sometimes 18 months. The legal system is too slow, and there needs to be a rapid legal mechanism that is brought in to be able to move as quickly as the criminals that launder the money across the world. And that's what's missing. So the most important thing for me as a private citizen involved in pretty heavy investigations in organised crime is the partnerships, is having key partnerships around the world that we develop, not only with law enforcement, but also anti-corruption agencies. Because in some countries where we've operated, we were not able to engage the police because they too were corrupted. So we had to engage with the law enforcement authorities. Now, the photo in the middle was taken in November with the Cambodian flag. I was invited to represent Cambodia as a delegate of the Cambodian National Police, as a special advisor to the Cambodian National Police. They recognised the help that I've given the Cambodian government by inviting me to sit at their table at Interpol. I was the only private investigator, as far as I'm aware, that was sitting at that event. And it allowed me, again, to expand my connections and contacts, because what I do have to do when I go into foreign countries is I have to build relationships with those law enforcement agencies, because it's about building trust. If we don't have trust, we have no relationship, because it's all about trust. And if we can build that trust under a lawful authority, then we actually have a good chance of winning the battle. Now, I'm going to just end in about 15 minutes, and I want to talk, I guess, a little bit about some of the operations that we have done, some of the successful ones, some of the ones that have been in the world media, and some that have led to victims getting back their money. I'll start with this particular case because it's one of my favourites. Tony Camilleri was an Australian architect based in Sydney. He thought he was investing stocks and shares into a company over in America called Smith & Olson. He believed that he was investing into real stocks and shares, but it turned out to be a scam. He lost his entire life savings, 1.8 million Australian dollars, and he was so distraught and stressed. He had a breakdown, a mental breakdown. His marriage broke up, and he ended up in a psychiatric ward of a mental hospital. Now, his story is a classic story of what victims go through. He was left in emotional ruin and financial ruin after 30 years of work. And when he came to me and told me his story, the sad part about the story was that no one in Australia was able to help him. No government, no law enforcement agency, nobody was able to go after the money. So I took it upon myself in 2012. I think the arrest was in 2014, but I think it took it on about 2012, a couple of years earlier. And I decided to use this case again as a case study because I was confident that we could track the people behind the scam, knowing how they operate and knowing how to trace the money. It was only a matter of days, and we tracked the scammers' emails to the Philippines. We realised that we're dealing with a British syndicate based in the Philippines. I already had extensive contacts in the Philippines, and it wasn't long before we were issuing arrest warrants in the Philippines for the mastermind. We tracked the money all over the world. It was an Israeli money laundering syndicate that laundered the money through Belgium, Israel, and United Kingdom. We successfully arrested the British mastermind in October of 2014 at the airport with 12 police officers, and we had 8 arrest warrants, but only one of them was executed against this particular individual. And when he was arrested, the police found that he had a bank account in Hong Kong with $2.2 million in it. So we used what's called a Mariva injunction. That was on a Friday night. On the Monday, with him in custody, we used a Mariva injunction, a freezing order in Hong Kong to freeze that $2.2 million. And we later recovered that money for Mr. Camilleri. And after all the costs and the legal fees and our fee and our commission component, the victim got back 100% of his money, the full $1.8 million. He was so happy about this that he decided to go public with his story. And he's been on a number of television shows, including a podcast series, telling his story about the ordeal that he went through and just how devastating this scam was, and how successful a private investigation had been to recover his money. And there could have been a lot of other people that could have told the same success story. Of course, we don't have hundreds of case studies, but we certainly have enough to prove that our business model works and that it should be implemented on a much bigger scale. This is another case that happened in 2018. This was the first time we saw the Israeli binary options industry, which was outlawed in 2017, move all their operations out of Israel over to the Philippines. In 2017, the Israeli government outlawed binary options trading, which had flourished for 10 years. They were making about $5 billion US per year in a criminal industry that was not illegal in Israel, but they did they outlawed it in 2017. And where did all the Israelis go? Well, they went to the Philippines. They set up their operations in the Philippines, and they employed thousands of Filipino workers in call centers to scam victims around the world. This particular scam was called Financial Trading Online, and they were making $1 million per week for 2.5 years, operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now, when I started investigating this case, I was astounded to learn of the size and scope of this operation. 3 call centers with 1,000 employees had been operating seemingly with impunity. There had been multiple complaints made to law enforcement in the Philippines, but no victims were able to be really identified by the Philippine authorities. People were reporting the scam, but there were no victims being reported. So I represented a number of victims, 5 victims in Australia. We filed cases using the same method that I spoke about earlier. This particular syndicate was arrested in what was one of the largest raids I've ever been involved in. I was not physically there on the day because I was traveling, but this particular group were hit. They were arrested. there was only 479 arrests, sorry, 474 arrests, because the other half of the shift was working night shift and not day shift. And so they were subsequently, we can only take down half the syndicate because we had to get the day shift. So 500 people got away, and we only arrested half of them. There was 8 Israeli managers, bosses, and they're the ones pictured in these photos. They only served about, I think, 1 week in prison, and they were taken out and they were not extradited. They were released and deported to Israel within 1 week. So they didn't serve more than 1 week in prison. And what the police told the media at the time was that there was a lack of evidence to hold these people any longer because it was such a complex crime. They had a lack of evidence, and they said we were unable to hold these people. So these people were released, and they flew out of the country in 1 week. They also hired a law firm in Israel. It was also the same law firm that represented the Israeli Prime Minister. So I'm not saying that the Israeli government had any involvement in this, but these Israeli crime bosses walked free within 1 week, and that's publicly documented. In 2018, we did another very interesting case. It was a big year for us. This one didn't result in a recovery, and it's an example of sometimes, no matter how hard you work, you still can't sometimes get a recovery, because this particular gangster who was arrested refused to negotiate, even though when he finally went to trial, his matter was, he was found not guilty. And there was a lot of suspicion about some of the evidence that didn't make it to the trial. And some of the evidence had been tampered with by the time the trial came about. Mr. Wayne Brown, the victim, went to the Philippines and testified. I testified for a number of days, but he was found not guilty, even though he was caught red-handed by the police. So this is where corruption can sometimes play a part in the prosecutions. And in this particular case, this particular person was released and found, he was actually given bail, and he was found not guilty at trial, despite an extensive amount of evidence that was found, because the evidence was tarnished by the time it went to trial. So this is one of the problems that we have dealing in countries like the Philippines. There's always the chance of corruption. This is a story that won an award also in 2018. I think I had 3 major stories in 2018 that were very newsworthy. And this one's called Busted. It's on YouTube. It won the Kennedy Award in 2019 for the best producer and best reporter. We recovered $540,000 for the Australian victims, and it was probably one of the first major busts that I had on the Australian media, which was 60 Minutes. And I wanted to take the film crew over to see how these operations work. And I wanted to show the whole of Australia that these syndicates can be taken down. These people can be arrested. All it takes is a little bit of will and the right legal mechanisms and the right skills, and we can go over into the Philippines and take down a major syndicate. And that not only did it result in warning millions of Australians about these scams, but the victims of this particular scam managed to get their money back. One of the main guys got nearly 100% of his money back. So again, we've got a case where our law enforcement agencies did absolutely nothing. Every complaint in relation to this syndicate never got investigated by our law enforcement, by state or federal police, because there was no mechanism in place back then to investigate these types of multi-billion-dollar crimes. There is now, but that was only introduced a couple of years ago, about 15 years too late. This was a more recent operation we did on superannuation scammers. We arrested 35 people in the Philippines who had taken millions and millions and millions of dollars out of retirees in Australia who had rolled their superannuation over into a higher interest self-managed fund, thinking that their money is safe, and it was taken by ruthless criminals in a call centre over in the Philippines, run by a British crime syndicate who made hundreds of millions of dollars stealing the life savings of Australian retirees. These are elderly people who, as you can imagine, were left in emotional and financial ruin and have no capacity to ever make that money back. So this crime leaves casualties not only across Australia, but across the world. The amount of people that have been financially and emotionally ruined and devastated can't be overstated. There's been people take their life, commit suicide. We've got multiple cases of people taking their own life because they've lost their life savings, what was supposed to be their retirement. And these are the stories that you don't see in the media very much. People are too ashamed to talk about it, and you just don't really hear about it. This was a case that involved corrupt police in Malaysia. We couldn't go to the police because the police were also involved in making money out of this syndicate. This syndicate was very powerful. In fact, I was warned by sources in the industry that if I try and take this syndicate down, I'll be killed, that my life will be in danger. And being in the industry so long, I always like a good challenge. So I decided that's a good enough challenge for me. I'm going to take the syndicate down. Took me 6 months to build the evidence, to infiltrate their operations, to put undercover people inside. And I brought the operation down with the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission, the MACC, who for the first time in history agreed to work privately with a private partner, IFW Global. We made history by taking down 4 major call centres simultaneously in February 2023. And again, this story made history because up until 2023, this syndicate had operated for 10 years and it was untouchable, and it was paying off the police $50,000 per month in bribes and unlawful corruption payments. So that's what we were dealing with. So even though some countries may be corrupted, we can still go above the law enforcement agencies, and we can work with any corruption agencies to make sure that law enforcement or any bad law enforcement officers are weeded out and arrested. And there were many law enforcement officers questioned following this operation. This one was in 2024, and I'm going to wrap up now because we're coming up to our 1 hour. This was one of the more recent ones. This is a monthly fee of $205,000 that this particular syndicate had made the month that we arrested them. The man sitting in handcuffs is a member of an Israeli crime syndicate. He's an Israeli national that lives in the Philippines. He's still on trial. He hasn't gone to trial yet. He's still going through the court process. And he's, of course, innocent until proven guilty. You will see in the reporter here holding up a phone of one of the victims that lost her life savings to this syndicate, coming face to face with the Israeli alleged criminal that was running this particular syndicate. And this publicity has saved, I'd say, millions of people from losing their life savings because they've suddenly realised that these investments are not real, and that this could have saved hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people from losing their life savings. So that's basically, that's the last slide, which is the international takedown we did on January 27. This is yet to go to air on 7 Spotlight next month here in Australia. And that resulted in 31 arrests over in Johannesburg. That was our last operation just a couple of months ago, and we're doing more operations in the coming weeks in other anonymous countries that we can't name at this point. So that's my talk today. The future of enforcement has to be public-private partnerships. Otherwise, we will never win this battle that we're fighting against international organised cyber scams. My contact details are there. You're welcome to contact myself or Mohammed to get in touch if you have any questions or anything that we can do to help. We're always happy to provide advice or seminars or education. So thank you very much for your attention, and thank you, Mohammed, for having me here today to give my presentation.